Here I do have to comment. At the risk of sounding like I'm joining the opposition, I actually think that the point that not all religions are the same is an important point. I also think that there is maybe a bit of misunderstanding between the questioner and Massimo, because I understood the questioner to mean that we haven't yet got a reasonable theory of what consciousness actually is. I know that there have been enormous advances in neurobiology. As you well know, they usually involve matters of correlation between physical events and mental events. We can't even conceive of how you could get a mental event from a physical event, because mental events have a kind of content, as you know the way this goes. They are about something. And that seems to be built into them. And I don't know how you get a test tube full of chemicals, neurotransmitters, electrochemical activity in the brain. I don't see how you can make that intrinsically about something. The fact is, we're in a situation with respect to consciousness, the way, quantum physics is in with respect to its theory. It has wonderful success at making predictions, but nobody can quite understand what kind of world it actually suggests we live in. It's a real puzzle. Now, I know we can now do wonderful things experimentally with neurobiology, but we've still got a major puzzle where we can't even imagine how all of this stuff hangs together. And so the fact is, I don't think the dogmatism is only on one side. Anybody who knows anything about the history of science, let me remind you, and by the way, I'm not bashing science. I think it is the most successful enterprise for the production of knowledge that human beings have ever engaged in. But the fact remains that anybody who knows about the history of science knows it is largely a history of error. That's one of its really strong points. Well, guess what? Religion is largely a history of error as well. Religion also evolves, just like science does. And let me also remind everyone that the overwhelming majority of the scientists who established the very scientific traditions we value so much today thought they were doing God's work. Right? Now, we leave that part out usually. When we teach Newton in the physics classes, we don't remind students, that Newton thought that space was God's sensorium. Right? We leave that part out. Well, okay, I understand why. It's a physics class. But the fact is that if we're going to ever understand the way these issues impact one another and get a realistic understanding of the relationship between science and religion and morality and politics and economics, we do, in fact, have to be fair to the historical record. It isn't the case that science is rational and religion is irrational. That's far too simplistic a story.
Okay, I have to say, science is rational and religion is irrational. And the development of science, science has evolved based on an objective criteria. What corresponds to reality? It's testable, it's knowable, and yes, is there bad science sometimes? Is there reductionism? Is there more further leaps to make? Of course, but the criteria to synthesize that is to get a richer application of science, better science. You answer bad science with good science, and you have a criteria of reality to sort out the disputes. And there will be debates, and there's a way in which then even the errors become a part of the accumulation of knowledge and the synthesis that emerges through science. Very different than the evolution of religion, which is, again, fantastical beliefs. Yes, religion has evolved, but the evolution of religion is the evolution of might makes right. There is no objective criteria to sort out religion, except who can enforce their ideas and their mythology on others. And that is actually the dominant, not the half the story. That's the dominant history of religion. And it is a history of brutality. It is a history of torture. It is a history of the subjugation of women. It is actually, that's the dominant thing. One other thing I have to say, though, is that there's a certain irony. I agree with the point. The methodology is wrong. Because at every point there's going to be, and science acknowledges this, there will be things that we don't know. That's part of the beauty of it. Somebody came up to me at UC Berkeley and said, okay, if there's no God, what's beyond the universe? And I was like, I don't know. But I'll tell you, 1,000 years ago, before we knew as much as we did about the universes, you wouldn't even be asking that question. And I know there are scientists who know more about it than I do, but the point is not that science is ever going to exhaust knowledge, because reality is infinite, and it's infinitely changing, and our ability to come to understand it is finite, even as it's developing. But there are always going to be things that we don't know, and the method of religion is to always seize upon those. The method of science is to open up inquiry there. The method of religion is to seize on that and say, aha, science doesn't know everything, therefore God. Well, 1,000 years ago, aha, we thought the earth was flat. There's a lot of things. And the other part of it is that at every point, I just have to say, we don't know enough about many aspects of the human mind, consciousness, many of these things. But at every point, religion has played a huge role in suppressing the advancement of science. I'm telling you, if everybody in this country and around the world had access to the science of evolution and learned the way the world worked, you'd have a lot more minds working on and solving things that today are mysterious and opening up new mysteries. There's a fundamental different method, and science is rational, and religion is irrational.
I found another interesting question. I promise I will start calling on people again. But this question asks, declaring the Christian or Islamic God does not exist is one thing, but what of declaring no God exists whatsoever? Is this not as fundamental and faith-based as declaring a God definitely exists? Doesn't the question of God's existence does the question of God's existence depend on God's definition? So I guess the way the order's been going, I'd like to start with you, Massimo. Go ahead.
No, it does not depend on the definition of a God. And I'll tell you why. The question of God's existence for a reasonable atheist, reasonable atheist is not an oxymoron, by the way, despite people like Dawkins. The fact of the matter is that if you're a reasonable atheist, or even in fact a reasonable agnostic, or a reasonable non-believer, or a reasonable whatever, a reasonable person, really, the basic claim is not that there is no God because I know that there is no God under any definition of gods. That is not what atheism is about. Okay? If you go to the etymology of the word atheist, it simply means atheist, without a positive belief in God. Okay? Now, I don't have to have positive proof of the inexistence of something for me to be very reasonable to say I don't believe that something. And I'll show you right here, right now, how many people believe that right next to me, on the other side from Samsara, there is an invisible unicorn that is smiling at me. Right. Okay? Now, how do you know that there is no invisible unicorn over here? By the way, it's not only invisible, it's also immaterial, so you can't slap him. Okay? How do you know? I challenge you to show me a logical or empirical proof that there is no immaterial unicorn right here. And I don't think you can. On the other hand, you'd be fooled to believe that there is, in fact, an immaterial unicorn sitting right next to me.
Can I ask a question, Massimo?
Sure. You want to know the color?
No.
Oh.
No. No, I think you're right that it would be unreasonable to believe that there's an invisible unicorn sitting next to you. But what I'd like to know is the thought that you were having about this invisible unicorn. Do you have any kind of evidence as to what that is and how that occurs?
Yeah, it depends on the good functioning of my neurons.
Right.
And you know how I know that? Because if you shut off those neurons, I'm not going to have any thoughts about unicorns or anything else.
Right.
In fact, there isn't going to be an eye to have anything.